Hi, everyone. My name is Donna Lopiano, and as president of the Drake Group, I'm delighted to welcome our attendees and panelists to the Drake Group webinar series on critical issues in collegiate athletics hosted by LRT Sports. As defenders of academic integrity and athlete protection in sports, Drake is committed to working with Congress to put pressure on the college athletic system to end the educationally and economically exploitive practices that harm college athletes. If you aren't familiar with the Drake Group or LRT Sports, we'll provide you with links during and at the end of the program so you can learn more and help support our efforts. But this entire hour and a half is for us to pick the brains of our expert panelists. So let me ask Kirsten Sayers, the founder and CEO of LRT Sports, to introduce LRT and to introduce our moderator. Kirsten?
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining, whether you're an attendee or a panelist. Appreciate your time. I am the CEO and founder of LRT Sports, and our mission is to help athletes in their process of understanding college athletics. And we also allow college athletes to rate their college coaches to create a more transparent space for athletes and coaches. So, you know, we have a great moderator today, Emmett. And, you know, I think our panelists are really, really top notch today. So I'm super excited. Katie has definitely moderated some events for us before, and she's done a great job, but this time we're going to pass it off to Emmett. So Emmett, thank you so much for joining today. And again, thanks again to all the panelists. And we will be sending out links to LRT Sports and the Drake Group throughout the presentation. So thank you guys again for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kirsten. I hope everybody can hear me, and, you know, congratulations on your new addition to the family.
Thank you.
Not a lot of sleep happening in that house right now. But I'm really excited, and welcome to the Silent Struggle. Experts speak out on college athletes and mental health. And as Kirsten alluded to and Donna has alluded to, I mean, we've got an incredible panel. I'm so thrilled to be able to have these 6 individuals in one place at one time and being able to pick their brain, in particular about mental health in college sports. You know, as we know, you know, college sports is constantly changing right now, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's name, image, and likeness. Yesterday, you know, the National Relations Labor Board sending out a memo with regard to college athletes being considered as employees. So there are a litany of issues on the heels of COVID. And so today we want to have an opportunity to talk about those issues. You already have the bio of this world-class panel, so I'm just going to simply introduce them. But before I do, I want to share a little bit about the structure. So the way that we decided to structure this is we really wanted to hear from some of the clinicians. So we have 3 clinicians who will be joining us for what we call the first half. And then during the second half, we have an incredible second half that includes administrators, or folks who are serving as administrators and or at the conference level. And so just really excited, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first 3 panelists. The first panelist is Dr. Daniel Chung. He is a sports psychologist at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, and he services their athletic department. And then we've got Abigail Eiler, who is an assistant athletic director and director of athletic counseling. Abigail is also the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer within the Department of Athletics at Michigan University. And I believe Abigail also has an appointment in the School of Social Work at the University of Michigan. Not sure, goodness gracious, Abigail. I thought I had a lot of titles. And then, you know, we've got Brad Hambrick, you know, who I've come to know over the past few years, and he's just an incredible clinician. He's a licensed professional counselor. He's been working for about, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years now within the University of Georgia Athletic Department. So like I said, we got a little Big Ten, we got a little bit of SEC. I'm an ACC guy myself, but I'm gonna go ahead and kick it off if y'all are okay, if y'all are ready to roll. Everybody ready to roll? Cool. All right. Well, first, I really want to open it up and let's go broad, right? Let's go down the field really quickly. And if you could share, Brad, Daniel, Abigail, sort of your top issues when it comes to mental health and wellness with college athletes today. And maybe we'll go ladies first. Ladies first.
Sounds great. Well, thank you all for attending today, and thanks for the invitation to speak. You know, there's a lot going on as it relates to the mental health and wellness of our student athletes. I think the first thing that's really important for us to point out is that when we look at the overall research, just for college students, about 35% of college students report having significant mental health symptoms, whether that be depression, anxiety, or other mental health conditions that are considered diagnosable disorders. And about 30% of those folks seek services and help. And that's not consistent for athletes across the nation and probably across the world if we really looked at a larger scope of services and care. So while we see some of the most prevalent issues of anxiety and depression, we also need to recognize that there's a lot of athletes that are not reaching out for support and there's probably a lot more going on than what we know. The one thing I would say is definitely at the forefront right now is this transition back into regular academia. Our student athletes are tired. They are adjusting back to this routine, and some getting into this routine for the first time because we had first-year students last year that everything was online for the most part here at the University of Michigan. So this is all very new to them, and figuring out how to balance that, comes with hardships sometimes.
Yeah, appreciate that, Abigail. And, for those clinicians out there, we know that, there is such thing as an adjustment disorder, right? Absolutely. Go ahead, Brad or Daniel.
I'll jump in. She nailed it. The transition, and has been a big piece of it because you have the freshmen coming in that haven't been in, and then on top of that, you got those who have been here, getting used to going to class, getting used to the buses and the bus systems, going to academic tutoring, mentoring. That is a big piece of it. The anxiety there. Missing something, just the overall balance, being able to find that time management skills, the anxiety symptoms, the depressive symptoms, being away from home, worrying about home. Those are things that, they worry about every day. Then having the accessibility, having a presence, having relatability, those things, create those significant mental health issues within our contingent here for sure.
Yeah, thank you for that, Brad.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. Again, just let me start by saying thank you everyone for being here today with all of us. 10 years ago, I was just finishing my doctoral program and coming out and, eager to get started in the field. And I don't think back then I would have thought that it was possible to have this kind of group today and webinar to talk about mental health among college athletes in particular. So it's a wonderful thing how far we've come in the field of mental health, but also sports psych and other related fields. Again, just thank you for being here, and I'm certainly honored to be here myself. So I'll just kind of add to what Abigail and Brad already mentioned. Certainly when it comes to mental health issues, yes, anxiety and depression at the top of the list. Abigail, I think, made mention of the number. It's about 33% that student athletes report, probably even higher, especially after COVID. And certainly we'll talk more about the COVID impact. So one of the things that I was thinking actually before the semester started was, well, what are some of specifically the COVID related mental health issues that we might be presented with? And so I was thinking along the lines of maybe like OCD, people being a little bit more kind of germophobic and those kinds of things. But interestingly enough, so far, I haven't really seen much of that. I think as people already mentioned, I think I've been seeing a lot of the adjustment issues, particularly with the incoming students, the freshman students. One thing I've seen that I hadn't really seen as much in the beginning part of the school year, the past several years, has been eating issues. And so I don't know if that's somehow related to COVID, but it'll be interesting to see if there is a correlation there. But again, I mean, certainly there's a lot of different mental health issues. And I always like to point out, it doesn't necessarily have to be diagnosable, right? We all struggle with anxiety or depression at some level. And so, as I would always tell my student athletes, it could be something, I don't want to say as simple as, but something as common as performance anxiety, right? Which is very common among our student athletes. And so we get a lot of those kinds of issues where we may not be diagnosing it, but it is something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Daniel. I think the point that Daniel alluded to is, diagnosable mental health disorders. For the clinicians and non-clinicians out there, in particular, the non-clinicians, we know that there are a certain number and set of symptoms, right, over a certain amount of time, before that becomes a diagnosable mental health disorder. And so, what I'm hearing is that there are a lot of circumstances right now, both old and new, that are impacting the mental health of our college athletes, not just our college athletes, but our coaches, our administrators, et cetera. But if we could backtrack a little bit, because sometimes I think we forget about the student part, right? And how challenging it is to be a student at some of these top rate universities, whether it's Rutgers, whether it's University of Michigan, whether it's University of Georgia. Is there anything else that y'all would like to say in terms of, the student side of things and how that can contribute to a mental health disorder or exacerbate it?
I think a big piece is that we're all at rigorous institutions, right? There is high academic demand and standard. And so for a lot of our student athletes, the stress of keeping up with that standard comes before their athletic performance or careers. And so I think sometimes when we look at that, we do see increased stress levels, sometimes anxiety that's contributing to that. There's a multitude of reasons why students might be struggling. And so we've got to always consider that. That's why we call them student athletes, right? The student piece comes first, and we try to really ensure that we're embracing that and supporting them along the way. I think that was probably one of the biggest adjustments this last year is all their tutoring and mentoring and resources all went online. And for many, online learning was a struggle. Someone that's a professor, online teaching was something I had to get used to very, very quickly. And so we were all kind of navigating this together, and it came with some challenges.
Yeah, well said, well said. And I know in particular, even, Abigail, and I know that Brad, you and I, we had a lot of conversations because we were about zoomed out, man. Every time we were running each other in Zoom, we're like, you're here too, and I'm here, and everybody's here. But, then you have to also think about the intersection with, right, any potential learning disabilities, which impacts a meaningful proportion, of people, college students and college athletes. So, the important thing here, I think, is that there are a lot of intersections. Anybody have anything else they want to share with regard to sort of the student role and its impact on mental health?
I would add, the social aspect of it too, because outside of the lines, over the past year and a half, our student athletes haven't been able to socialize as much. They haven't been able to see, people in class, people in our academic setting, where they go to get their tutoring. That social aspect has been taken away, and that has impacted a lot of our student athletes as well. Not being able to have that social space, that's been difficult as well. Then you have students that, are stronger students because they had a stronger academic base, but prior to coming in and having that adjustment added on to just the intensity of the athletic demand, that's something else that they have to get caught up to. And like you said, transitioning to the virtual part of it was difficult as well for some.
Yeah. And just for our audience, I know I see some questions in the question and answer portion of the Zoom, so we're definitely going to get to those. Please keep them coming. Some of them we'll hit, as we progress, but please keep them coming. The big ticket item. There are a couple of big ticket items that I want to talk about, but COVID, right? There are so many implications when we talk about COVID, when we talk about vaccinations, when we talk about, some of the things that we've talked about in terms of making an adjustment and making a transition. When you think about COVID, I know a lot of things are going to come to mind, but sort of what are your top two issues that come to mind when you think about COVID and the mental health, of our student athletes, of our college athletes?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is just from a more general standpoint, obviously, needless to say, I mean, COVID literally turned all of our worlds upside down. And I think the one thing that it kind of took away for a lot of young people in particular is this sense of safety and security. It's hard enough, as people had already mentioned, being a young person, starting out at a academic institution, going away to school, which, by the way, compared to the general student population, I think student athletes are probably longer away from home or further away from home. They do a lot more going to school out of state. And so I think that's hard enough already, but when you kind of lose this sense of safety and security, that no longer are you in an environment that could be safe, and that's not, excluding academic institutions like universities, that's the first thing that jumps to mind. So with that, I think, anxiety was already high, I think, among the college student population, particularly student athletes. But I was thinking that we'll probably see an even greater spike in anxiety issues or anxiety-related issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel, when you think, when you say that word safety, we think about COVID, for a meaningful percentage of folks, this was a traumatic experience. And then we have to think about, that idea of trauma-informed care and how well equipped we are in athletics to deliver that kind of care to a population that previously or continuously think of themselves as invincible. I love that point that you make about safety and security. Other thoughts with regard to the impact of COVID?
Yeah, I was going to say exactly what the two of you just touched on, the traumatic stress piece. We did multiple surveys for our student athletes, even prior to them coming back last fall, to see, how many people experienced loss, how many people, felt this sense of grief, right? We had seasons disrupted, we had people lose family and friends, and there was a lot of trauma. And coming back, how were those experiences going to exacerbate other mental health conditions or just symptoms and concerns? So I think the safety, increased anxiety. We also saw a lot of difficulty with sleep, actually significant difficulty with sleep. As a professor, I never thought that I would ever teach anybody laying in their bed. But I did a lot of teaching when people were laying in their beds last year. And so you have to think about what that does to sleep patterns and sleep efficiency. And so we had a lot of people that had disruptive sleep and sleep difficulties for the last year, and we're continuing to see that right now. And then also symptoms that we would see as being consistent with depression. So extreme sadness, hopelessness, that worry of what's to come. I think were the primary things that we continued to navigate and we're navigating still today.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Thank you for that. And before we hit up Brad, I just want to throw something out to the clinicians. Just think about very quickly, all of these things, sitting in your office, how do you assess all of this that's going on? You know what I'm saying? Limited time, so many different issues, but maybe we can hit that later. Brad, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. In addition to what they were saying, early on, when you were having those that tested positive and you got 10 days, alone, you're seeing the increase in, those depressive symptoms, the anxiety. And then you got that sense of divisiveness amongst teams and students just because the levels of, being safe. You have some that are at one end of the spectrum, some that are in the total other opposite. So, that came into play. And, just the fear of, getting affected and having to go into that isolation, that quarantine, because you get some that will get hit a close contact and then come back a week or two later, and then they have to, they test positive. So it's like they almost spend a month in isolation, and just how that affects individuals. So just the divisiveness of it was a big deal. It continues to be.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, Brad, because teams are like many families, right? If not primary families, they're extended family, and there are these levels of isolation, right? We're already isolated in COVID, and now we test positive, there's further isolation, and then there could be a little bit of resentment. Man, were you the one, who I contracted COVID from? So those are definitely issues. Before we move on to the other big ticket items, is there anything else that y'all wanted to reflect on with regard to COVID and its impact? These are some really great points.
I'll just add that, I know with a lot of athletes, unlike a lot of the general student population, they've been afforded the opportunity to be around their peers even during a big part of COVID. But I know that coming back and transitioning back to university with the rest of the student population, I know that I get the sense that there's an increase in some social anxiety. Again, I'm just starting out with the semester, but I have a few students on my caseload that have basically told me that they're not going out like their teammates are. They're actually preferring to stay home and just kind of lay low. And so I wonder how much of that is related to maybe this anxiety of being around other people. And, if that impacts, kind of like Brad mentioned before, if that impacts their kind of social interaction and, their ability to develop some social skills.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Daniel. Just a lot going on in my mind right now. It's such a challenge, and I'm just so thankful that your athletic departments have you there, doing this work. The other big ticket item that I wanted to throw out to you is, two big things that are happening right now are, sort of social media, the impact of social media, and it intersects with another issue, which is the actuality that college athletes now have the right to use their name, image, and likeness. And, did a piece the other evening, and there's some positives to this, possibly to mental health and wellness, but there are also some negatives. Could you talk a little bit about, your thoughts with regard to how social media and or name, image, and likeness is impacting college athletes' mental health and wellness?
So I can start with that. I think I'll focus more on the social media side of it, just because I've seen the implications over the last several years that I've been in collegiate athletics. So I was fortunate that when I was a student athlete, there was no social media, right? We didn't have those stress, the pressures. If there were things that were written about us, they were written in the news, and typically they were censored and edited, and it was a different approach and experience. That's not the case now. Anybody can post anything at any time. I remember when I came back to athletics in 2017, and one of the things that I first saw during my first season back was one of our student athletes, a receiver, dropped a ball in the end zone. Guess what? That happens all the time, right? And the response that we got via social media was, you dropped the ball, you should die. And then directives on how to do that.